My name is Trip Gorman, and in this episode of Semilla.VC, I sat down with Christian Jacobsen. He's the co-founder and CEO of Crema, a payment solution tailor-made for creators, makers, and independent professionals, offering everything you need to operate smoothly and worry-free as a business of one. Christian previously held roles at Vetta, a corporate startup generator. He was also previously co-founder of okboy and Agave Blanco. In this episode of Semilla.VC, we discussed how his startup okboy collapsed due to the mafias that operate in the Mexican propane delivery market. We talked about Mexico City as a founder and VC ecosystem, including discussion about specific neighborhoods where they live and meet up like the Roma, Condessa, Polanco, and Valle. We talked about why Christian is betting big on Mexico for the long term, and while others might not be. We also discussed if you could be a VC or startup founder in Mexico City as a non-Spanish speaker. We talked about all this and more in this episode of Semilla.VC. Christian, could you start by telling the audience a bit more about your work history up to and including your current role at Crema?
Yeah, so I'll do the most interesting part, I think, because there's some parts that aren't that interesting where I worked at Dell and stuff like that. But I think the most interesting part starts where I went to Mexico. I moved to Mexico, and then I found myself in the ecosystem of entrepreneurship here in Mexico, which very lucky for me, I entered in the venture builder called Strategy that has created some startups, at least in Mexico, that are pretty well known. Also, the founders of that venture builder are pretty well-known entrepreneurs here in Mexico. So I was very lucky to enter into that venture builder, to enter into that ecosystem, and obviously learning a lot on how to build startups right from scratch. Basically, what we did there. Then after that, obviously, I went to a startup generator called Vetta, where it's very similar. The only difference is that we created startups together with corporations. So what we did basically is a corporation came and said, "Hey, I need to innovate. I want to see if I can, make a startup." And so we did, all the research, user research, everything in their industry, in their market, with the idea that we're going to take advantage of the competitive advantages that the company has, right? Make the startup have a flying start, you could say. So that's what we did. We created startups with several corporations here in Mexico. That obviously for me was a great experience, just because you can fail with other people's money, right? You don't have to do it with your own money. I think that's something super valuable. You learn a lot about how to create a startup, what stuff not to do. Like we were spending like ridiculous amounts of money on marketing and stuff like that as a startup founder you would never do, because you have to really take care of your runway many times. So that's kind of the stuff that I learned in especially that last experience. And obviously from there I went, I tried different stuff that you can see on my LinkedIn, but I went on to create okboy, which is like an Uber for propane gas in Mexico. Basically, the problem that we were solving was propane gas in Mexico, which is the most used gas in Mexico that you use for cooking, you use it for heating your water and everything like that, is just in the 50s, right? The biggest innovation that's been in that market is WhatsApp, right? That you can ask for your gas in WhatsApp. So we were like, how can we change that? How can we innovate here? And obviously Uber was a model that made a lot of sense, give a lot of visibility to the users, let them see, when is the dude coming? How much is the price? Choose between different companies as well, right? So we did that. It went pretty well, but it wasn't like a market that I was very passionate about. It's gas. And in addition, there were several problems with like mafias in Mexico City that made it very difficult to operate. So it wasn't like an industry I was very passionate about. So I decided to leave that, and that's kind of where I was finding myself giving advice to other founders inside Vetta, helping them with how to create startups and what we've done in the past. And then also together with my now current co-founder, Ramon, start to ideate what today is Crema. No? So that's kind of the whole background of what I did before creating Crema. Right now, I'll tell you a little bit about what it is and what we do. But also in the meantime, like any entrepreneur, I was freelancing, to have some extra money on the side, also to give operations to the business. So that's kind of an experience that I had to do to keep the business afloat, to keep my personal life afloat. And then based on that experience of being a freelancer, of working with companies, one problem that always came up with them was getting paid, right? So many times as a freelancer, usually what happens is you get so excited that you got a new client, right? You kind of forget of what's going to happen when you finish the job, right? Getting paid, which is the most important part for a freelancer. So you kind of forget about that. It goes into like a forgotten book while you're working on the project. You don't really want to be charging your client as well, because that's not your core as a freelancer. Usually you're a freelancer because you're very good at, design or consulting or accounting, whatever it is. You're not like a professional collector, right? So that's something that's, well, for a lot of freelancers, it's a pain to be doing that all the time, and it takes the focus away from actually delivering what you were supposed to deliver. So that's kind of the problem that we saw, that we wanted to solve. Obviously, there's plenty of problems for freelancers, right? But this was like a pain that we had, because it's really hard, right? When you have to be after your clients. Hey, can you pay me? Can you pay me? Can you pay me? Can you pay me? You create a lot of friction too. So if you were hoping to retain the client, right, keep working with them, if you keep charging them like that, at some point there's going to be so much friction that either you or the client's going to be like, you know what, maybe I'll work with someone else next time. So that's not something that you want, because you usually work hard to get clients, right? That's, I think, the most difficult part of being a freelancer, is getting the client. It's why there are so many solutions like Upwork, Fiverr, freelancer.com, and so many solutions that focus on connecting freelancers with clients. So it's very, very hard, that part, but a lot of things happen in between, right? So if you don't use one of those platforms and you find your own clients, you still have to manage them, right? Which is very, very difficult. Usually you're one person, so you don't have like a team who can manage your clients, charge them, financing department, accounting, and everything like that. So that's kind of the things that we wanted to change with Crema. We wanted to help freelancers charging their clients, make it super easy for them to charge, and for the clients to pay them the way they want, give them terms that they usually have with other providers that you also want with freelancers. So that's kind of what we went through to build what Crema is today. And obviously we have bigger plans of what Crema can be, but that's where we are today, more or less.
Could you discuss a little bit more about why Mexico City in the first place? And then we'll continue on to ask, why is Crema uniquely situated in Mexico, and what that competitive advantage is there? Yeah.
So well, I'm in Mexico City because my wife is Mexican. So I met her in San Francisco, where I was studying at the University of San Francisco. We met there, and then obviously a little after the studies, we stayed there to work and stuff like that. But we decided to go to Mexico. I'd never lived in Mexico before, so it seems interesting. The times that I visited, I really liked it. So I was like, let's do it. Let's see what's good there. And it's been really cool. I think Mexico City is probably one of the hottest cities right now in terms of touristing, but also in terms of a growing startup scene, for example. So that's kind of cool that we're in the middle of that right now. Obviously, it helps us in Crema, for example, in terms of fundraising, because there's a lot of interest in Mexican startup in Mexico City. A lot of VCs, a lot of angels come to Mexico to meet entrepreneurs. So yeah, there's a lot of entrepreneurs in Mexico that are making the startup scene grow. I think it's interesting to see entrepreneurs that usually come from the US or from Europe, whatever, that come in and contribute to the ecosystem and help maybe people from Mexico, people from Latam that maybe don't have the same experience in raising capital, in growing big businesses. So they're coming to help us out. And I think that's great. And that's what's helping the ecosystem, in addition to obviously all the VCs and stuff like that are coming to visit. And then Mexico as a country is incredibly big. There's a lot of opportunities. You see it, all the fintechs that are coming out because of the breach between financial inclusion that exists, obviously. But there's so many other markets that are ready to be innovated. I think that's what's interesting, just because the market is huge, right? And if you look at LATAM as well, I think I don't remember the number. There's 540 million people in LATAM. A lot of opportunities to explore there. For us, obviously, we took the freelancer route. There's 13 million freelancers in Mexico alone. There's 54 million in LATAM. There's 59 in the US, right? So there's a lot of opportunity for us to create something that can give value to a small percentage of these people, right? That don't have access to financial products. They don't have access to a lot of stuff that a lot of the Western worlds already have, but also if you're in payroll, let's say in a company, you have that access, right, with banks and everything like that. So that's what we're trying to change. And I think Mexico is a very, very interesting country of opportunity for what we're trying to build.
I've talked to some people in the past that previously worked at Uber, and they said the taxi unions kind of operated a little bit like mafias. And in your intro answer, you said that there were issues with mafias when you were founding okboy. Could you go into a little more detail on that?
Yeah, so I don't really know that much about how the taxi industry works, but I can tell you exactly how the gas industry works. So there's independently, if you're part of a company or not, you usually have like a zone that's like your zone. Let's take La Roma, which is a known neighborhood in Mexico. There's X number of gas suppliers there, right? And we're not talking about companies, we're talking about people. But just because the way that it works in Mexico is that you as a person, you buy a gas truck, you buy the licensing rights of a brand, let's say Sony Gas or Global Gas. You buy the rights to have that brand on your truck, but you operate as a business, right? So there's a lot of people who have their own businesses, and obviously their interest is to sell more, right? And their interest is to have an area that is theirs. And if someone comes in and tries to sell gas in your area, that obviously affects your business, right? So little by little, just because of this environment, they started to create like mafias, like, hey, Trip, let's protect this area together, make sure no one comes in. So they started forming like small syndicates, you could say, or mafias that would protect each area, right? And then when an app like okboy comes along that lets users ask for gas from whoever, and we just send the closest one that might not be one of the mafia guys, this guy comes into the area, he fills up gas for the client, and what usually happens is that they block him, right? They block this gas truck, they stop him, he can't move anywhere, and they come out and threaten him, sometimes with, beating him up, sometimes with guns. And there have been killings, like, just because of territory management. So that's kind of the mafias that they have in Mexico City, just because it's a very lucrative business too, right? So we were talking to several of these guys who not only had one truck, but they had 10, and they were making millions of dollars a year. And obviously they have their interest to protect their own business, right? And the only way they know how to protect it is with mafia activities.
What an answer. What an answer. Could you tell the American that's thinking about going to Latin America, or the European that's coming to Latin America to start a startup? Obviously, that was a very interesting story that is tough to follow. But what else should they know about building in Latin America? And feel free to just give one crazy example if that's something that you have in your arsenal.
I don't know if I have any crazy examples, but I think what's important to know is that there's a lot of things that we take for granted, you could say, in the US and Europe, stuff like infrastructure that you don't really have here. Obviously, it's becoming better and better every single day, but because of corruption, because of what's happening in politics, the money that you pay as a taxpayer is not reflected in your day-to-day life, right? Because there's a lot of corruption. They take it into their own pockets. So that's kind of stuff that you have to be aware of, that stuff is going to take a lot longer, right? Making a company is going to take longer too, right? In the US, I think you can create a company in 10 days, right? You have a C Corp in Delaware in 10 days. Here in Mexico, it's going to take you 3 to 6 months, right? To have a operating entity. So that's kind of stuff that takes time, that you have to take into consideration. But I think given that, that's exactly what gives you the opportunity to do a lot of stuff, right? So there's so many interesting places where you can just create something because there's so many problems. And that's what makes the market so interesting, because something that you would never think of as a problem, because in your daily life it works, right? Where you live. But in Mexico or in LATAM, in any country, basically in LATAM, that is a big problem, right? What you thought was normal is just not possible, right? And fixing that could be, $1 billion business without you even thinking that it would be something in the US, right? So that's kind of something that's very interesting, but it's also, it calls for irritation sometimes, right? You're just like, man, how can it take so long to create a company here? How can it take so long to go to the bank and get a bank account? How can it take so long to file for your taxes or get your tax ID? So there's a lot of stuff that are annoying, you could say, but it also gives access to opportunities and to solve problems.
That's very interesting. How did you go about funding for Crema?
Yeah, so we started fundraising right away. Like when we got an idea, we were like, okay, let's get some funding to get this idea on its legs at least. So we knew we had something, obviously, when we were talking about the idea, when we kind of made the first, you could say, mini MVP, because it was really a mini MVP of literally a Stripe payment link. But we saw that it worked, right? So we were like, okay, this is something, let's get some funding. So we started by going to the startup generator where both of us worked for Vetta, like I told you, and we said, hey, we have this idea. Do you guys want in on it? And luckily for us, they said yeah. So they gave us $100,000 for that. So that gave us a little bit of peace of mind, obviously, to go about what we wanted to. Obviously, it gave me some time to set up a fundraising process a little bit more structured. It gave Ramon, my co-founder, some time to develop the technology, to also look at who we could hire to help with technology. And then what we also wanted to do was to get a lot of entrepreneurs in on the journey, right? Because a lot of times people go straight to VCs, for example, in the early days, which, unless you're very, very known founder of you've had an exit or you've been very successful, it's going to be very difficult to get VC money in the start, right? So you're better off with angels. We've decided to go after entrepreneurs that could help us along the way. So you could say strategic entrepreneurs more than anything, with the idea that they are also going to not only help us get us clients, but they're also going to help us further down the line in our next funding round, with interest to VCs, with interest to angels and that stuff. So that's kind of how we thought about it. Obviously, along the way, those entrepreneurs just created intros with VCs right away so that we could get some funding from some micro funds. So that helped us out a little bit too. And right now we are going to most likely prepare for a round that's going to be in October, November, which would be our, I don't know what you were going to call it, but pre-seed, seed, something like that. And hopefully we can take advantage of the effort that we did principally in creating a network of entrepreneurs and small angels that can help us to raise money now from maybe some bigger VCs.
I love it. I've a question that might be off topic, but it's something near and dear to my heart because I love domains. And Crema's domain is crema.cm. Why'd you
Yeah.
pick crema.cm? I didn't even know that was a top level domain. I'll be honest, I thought it was a typo. So the first email I sent was to .com, but
Right.
I love it. So why'd you choose .cm?
Yeah, so I think there should be a little bit of background here. So Crema is a conjunction of two words, which is creators and makers. So that's kind of how we came up with Crema, because the solution is for creators, people who create, people who make a lot of stuff, people that make stuff happen. So that's kind of how Crema was born, right? Crema, and then CM, just because we didn't want to buy the .com, it was expensive. Hopefully when we have enough money, we can buy the .com. But we said, so what is it that we want from the domain? Because if you don't have a .com, it doesn't really matter if you have .io, .app, whatever, right? It's going to be difficult to find either way. So he said, let's try CM for creators and makers. So there's like a double, you could say, and it worked. I'm not really sure where CM, like the country it originates from, but it doesn't really matter. That's what we have right now. Hopefully one day in the future we'll have the .com too, but that's kind of the answer there, why the .cm domain.
You said you're not sure where it is. I just Googled it. It's Cameroon. So
It's
we'll
Cameroon.
say thank you to the Agency of Technology of Cameroon for
Yes.
helping Crema there.
Thank
But
you,
I'll continue on. In some of your previous answers, you've discussed how Mexico City as a tech scene is growing and it's very vibrant right now. Could you go into more depth about how that's helped you as both a person? Because I've talked in previous, my guests have talked in previous interviews on building a tech city. Part of it is having the opportunity to live your life with other people that are in the industry. So tell us about that whole holistic perspective on how Mexico City is growing as a tech city and how you interact with it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so I think it comes back to what happened, you could say, like 4 or 5 years ago, where startups in Mexico were creating buzz. There was Kavak, there was Confio, there was Quesky, startup that started raising a lot of money from other VCs, like in the US, for example. So that created more and more buzz, obviously, of what you could do, right? And being a Mexican startup, it gave hope to a lot of entrepreneurs. I think from that point on, a bunch of entrepreneurs were born because it was possible right now. So that kind of helped more people becoming entrepreneurs. I think also VCs and foreign entrepreneurs coming into Mexico, seeing how cool Mexico is and trying to live there. The cost of living is much lower. There's a lot of stuff to do here. So they came in and they were looking for a startup scene or startup ecosystem that didn't really exist. It was very closed. So they kind of helped opening it up, making it more accessible to everyone, because before it was just the elite founders who were just getting together in dinners, right? But now the foreign founders and VCs came in, started creating events, started opening up the ecosystem much more to make it more accessible for the everyday founder, you could say. And obviously part of it is community, right? So you as a founder, you want to belong. It's very difficult for you. You're alone. Maybe you have a girlfriend or a wife or a boyfriend or a husband. They don't really understand what you're trying to do. They don't understand how heavy the weight is on your shoulder a lot of times. So you get together with entrepreneurs who understand it. You can have a much more honest conversation. I think that's super important to create that community in the ecosystem. I think it's what has helped the ecosystem in Mexico grow a lot. Thank you to the foreign founders, the VCs that came in, opened it up. And now, obviously, all of these founders are getting together, getting to know each other, trying to help out as much as they can, right? Because we want everyone to succeed usually. So that's kind of what happens as well. And daily there are events right now, right? In Mexico City, there's events for everything, which is pretty awesome. And that's kind of how you get together and you get to know other people as well, people who can help help you with this or that, make intros, be your new client, right? And I think everything is based off of a common honesty and understanding that we have. Right? Being founder is hard. Let's try to help each other out with it. And yeah, that's kind of how I see the scene moving right now.
I'm going to ask a three-part follow-up to that, because I think, if I may, I think a lot of the Americans, they hear about Mexico City, they hear about the tech scene, but they might not understand all the different pieces of it, myself included. So I have three little pieces that I'd like to know more about. Geographically, where in Mexico City are all these founders living? Is it concentrated in a certain group of neighborhoods? Are the conversations that are being had, are they in English, or are they in Spanish, or are they both? Are they more English, more Spanish? And then finally, you have a wife that's Mexican. So is this a long-term, multiple decades you're going to live there for the rest of your life, or do you see yourself going somewhere else? And then how does that compare to some of the other Americans who, they say they live in Mexico now, but maybe they're already planning their move back to their home city in the U.S. within the next 5 to 10 years. So that is a lot to answer. If you want me to repeat parts of that, please let me know. Don't feel pressured, but I'd love to know all about that.
Yeah, so I think the language that's spoken is a mix, I would say, because obviously a lot of people come in and they don't know Spanish, they don't speak Spanish. So try to facilitate that by speaking Spanish, but obviously being in Mexico, the official language is Spanish. So if you can speak it, obviously that's going to give you a plus in the locals book, you could say, and make it a lot easier for you to connect with them. But a lot of the events, a lot of the get-togethers are in English, just because it makes it easy for everyone. I think most of the founders in Mexico and in Latam speak English. There's not really a problem there. And then in which neighborhoods do all these founders live? So it's very diverse, I would say. But let's say the foreign founders or the foreign VCs usually live in the area that's La Roma y Condessa, which is like you could call it the hip neighborhoods here in Mexico City, but they also tend to be in Polanco sometimes, right? Which is like the more fancy neighborhood. So that's kind of where you can see most foreign founders, but you also see, local founders that are there because that's where a lot of things are happening. You could also see that they are living in La del Valle, which is another area here, which is more up and coming. It's cheaper just because La Roma and Condessa became very expensive. So there's a neighborhood very adjacent who's up and coming, is cheaper for founders to live. So that's kind of where you will find a lot of founders. But in those four neighborhoods is where a lot of the activities are found. And then to answer the question about how I'm thinking about Mexico and how other people are thinking about Mexico in terms of staying long term and stuff like that. So I am invested obviously in staying here just because my company is here, my wife is here, my son is from Mexico. So staying here is for me obviously what I'm thinking about. But I also want them to try other cultures, live everywhere else, because it has worked well for me, right? So I didn't just live in Mexico. I've been living in 4 different cities and experiencing how that has helped me in different terms. So I want that obviously for my kid. I want that for him when he grows up. I couldn't answer you how long I plan to stay in Mexico, but I think it is long term. It's not just the next year. It's most likely the next 5, 6, 7 years, and then we'll see. And in terms of people who come in, I think people come, let's say Americans, they come, they see this is a growing ecosystem, and I think the investment that they're going to make is going to be based on if the ecosystem stays that way, if it stays growing, if it's fruitful. Yes, they're going to stay longer. If it stops being that, they're going to go back, right? I think that's the answer to that question. Obviously, the quality of life in Mexico is incredibly high. It's perfect weather all year round. The food is amazing. So there are people, or there are things that can most likely contribute to them staying if the ecosystem doesn't keep growing and doesn't keep being fruitful. But I think in the most sense, people will stay if the ecosystem gives them what they need, make sure that they grow in their careers. And if it doesn't, they're just going to go to the next growing ecosystem, right? I think that's kind of what's going to happen.
I'm certainly putting my eggs in the Latin America basket. So hopefully it continues to grow. And I think it certainly will. So finally, I have to ask Peter Thiel's famous contrarian question, but with a uniquely Semilla.VC twist. What important truth about Mexico or Latin America do very few people agree with you on?
It's a very, very difficult question. Just because I don't think that I hold anything super contrarian in terms of Mexico or Latam. I think it maybe was contrarian a couple of years ago when I first moved here, but it's not anymore, just because you can see that it's the ecosystem is growing, but the amount of opportunity, I think I've mentioned it before, is just tremendous. There's so many problems that you can solve. I think you can go out on the street in Mexico and then you find 10 ideas to make a start, right? To improve infrastructure, to improve everything that has to do with banking, everything that has to do with payments, cross-border stuff. I think the interaction between countries in LATAM is increasing. And I think that presents a very, very unique opportunity for a lot of startups who can help facilitate those cross-border interactions. I think that's going to be very, very interesting. I think right now, something interesting is going to take place with crypto. That's going to make Latin America maybe one of the most important areas in the world for that, just because banking is broken, cross-border is broken, and crypto is going to help facilitate that. I think that's going to be very, very interesting. We're certainly seeing that in Crema. You can pay with crypto, you can get paid with crypto. We also see that I think banking in regards to crypto is going to be huge. I think you can create basically a bank. You're not allowed to call it a bank. You can call it an account or whatever. You can create a bank that's going to be completely borderless, make everyone in LATAM and everyone in the world be part of it. And you can get access to everything that you have in any other bank in Mexico or US, whatever. You can have that completely decentralized. I think that's going to be very, very big in LATAM. And I think in Crema, for example, that's a bet that we're making right now. And I think that's going to be something that's going to grow immensely in the next coming years.
I love it. Christian, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Semilla.VC podcast today.
No, thank you so much for having me, Trip.
Thank you for watching this episode of Semilla.VC. My name is Trip Gorman. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you view the podcast. And don't forget to check out our newsletter, Dealflow LA, which can be found by going to dealflow.la.